All right, looks like we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Wildwoods beekeeping chat. And tonight we have a very special guest, Randall Carter from Hill Honeybees. Carter's in Northwest Alabama, and it's good to have you on here, Randall.
Well, it certainly is a pleasure and an honor to be on here with you, Grayson. I'm glad to see somebody young like you taking interest in beekeeping. It makes me feel good. I'm proud to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too, because we're both in Alabama. We probably still have different temperatures, but we're probably pretty similar. And because there's not a too big difference. I know sometimes y'all get a little more of a chance of snow, but not as down here we never really get snow or anything. Never really see it. It's really rare, in winter. But to start us off, before we get into any of the future topics I have planned tonight, I was wondering if you could briefly share with us kind of about you, about kind of how you got into bees and a little about yourself, if you would.
Sure. I've been beekeeping for 17 years since I started this time. My first exposure to bees was through my grandfather back in my early childhood in the late 70s. I work for a ready-mix concrete company. That's my day job, and this is sort of a hobby for me. I currently have about 22 or 3 colonies, and that's pretty much it. Unless I've left out something there, but yeah, that's in a nutshell. That's kind of what I do.
Yeah, I have 5. I actually have if I wanted to include every single hive, I have about 10. Like splits that I do. I've been doing a lot of expansion. This year I've been already kicking it off pretty good. Did a lot of splits, and they're doing pretty good from what I can tell. I haven't seen any new queens yet. Plus, I'm not into the near time for there to be a laying queen. I'm probably, I'd say, 3-4 weeks into my split. Probably just about to get mated well and start laying, so that's good. And, kind of the same. We started in 2017, 7 years, 6. This is my 6th year. This is my 7th season. I've really liked it all the way. You always experience all different stuff, like mistakes and all whatnot and stuff throughout those 7 years of beekeeping. But it's something that can hook you on pretty good, and especially once you start messing around with bees and get beehives and do all the different stuff, you're like, wow, this is cool. That's how we were. We just looked on the internet, saw some things about bees and we're like wondering that'd be cool. A fun hobby to get us outside and do something, kind of like anything, and never find something to do like a hobby. It's a hobby, but a serious hobby. And we've been doing it for 7 years. And I do have to say that this year, last winter was like one of my best winters I went through. I had 6 hives going into winter. I came out with 5, which is, wasn't bad at all. Compared to my ever previous years where I lost so many hives. But, it has been a very good experience, to be able to keep bees and do all that different stuff.
Well, that's awesome. That's tremendous. You only lost 1 last year.
Yeah.
And, your learning curve's definitely better than mine was as far as that kind of loss. I tried treatment free for well over a decade, and
yeah.
So most years I would lose 30 to 45% of my colony. So that's great. You only lost 1 this past winter.
Yeah. Many of my hives, I didn't treat. Some of them I did, I'll treat whenever I need to. Of course, I won't treat, without, testing and treating for no reason. But if they do need a little, treatment in there, I'll give it to them, just to bump down the mites and that kind of thing. But, I had hives that went into winter without treatments. Let's just say basically me not feeding them. They went good. They barely touched their, food, their honey, even their leftover food. They barely touched it. So I was impressed with all that different kind of stuff. And, I think the main different thing about my going for winter strategies and all that different stuff is I've noticed that, the Russian bees, well, they're a little different, but they do go through winter and they handle and eat their honey different than Italians. Italians, I'll see them consume a lot. They just consume a lot of their honey, a lot of their leftover food that you give them, maybe extra stuff. You never know, that kind of stuff, and they just go for it pretty fast. But I've noticed with Russians, it's a little different. While I'm speaking of that topic, I guess that would be a good topic I never want to talk about. In your years of beekeeping, Randall, have you ever found like a certain breed of bees that you like? I've been discussing a little bit about, different breeds. And, you have Italian, Russian. Which one is your most favorite and difference between the bunch and why you like them?
Well, I have had Italians. That's what I started out with, and then I got in some Russians, and now I'm kind of into Carniolans. Right now, I would say the Carniolans are my favorite. I would love to try some Caucasians and see how they do, and I like the Carniolans because they seem to be really responsive to the environment, and they can winter on stores better, in my opinion. And it's also part of my mite treatment strategy to they kind of will have a smaller winter cluster than Italians, and I think in my opinion the efficacy of the winter treatment that I do is probably a little better since there's not quite as many bees.
Yeah. I've noticed I've never kept a Carniolan. I'm only experienced with, Italian and Russian so far. And, what I've found is that they're both pretty good. I hear a lot about Carniolans because, Carniolans, they go into winter with smaller clusters generally most of the time, and they don't eat as much, so and easier to kind of handle. They're a little more nicer. Those things are the things that matter. So I've heard a lot about carnies, and I really do like all. I think they're all good, but the ones I'm experienced with are Italian and Russians. I found that Russians are pretty good with mites and that such. Keeping temperament with them, but the bad side on that for a beginner is they're a little more feisty, as we all know. My Russians are pretty spicy, especially down here in Alabama. That's just how they are. And they'll get you on. They'll get you even if you get close to their hive. They'll kind of come out and just kind of scout around you. But I think but I have found that the Italians are pretty good. And because they do go into winter with bigger clusters and all that different stuff, as we all know. But I think they're pretty good for like splits. I found that they're really good for splits and duplicating the hives. They explode once you put them in a box and let them grow for as long as you put 3-4 frames of food and a lot of brood and a lot of eggs and larvae and let them raise their own queen. I found that they grow over that time with all that brood hatching, and those Italians do very, very good there, to expand and all that different stuff. But I've heard a lot about carnies and, carniolans and buckfast. I haven't been experienced with any of those, but I have with some of the others. So breeds, you can go into so many different things like, VSH and all that different breeds and different kind of traits you can get into those bees, and it's just a lot to take in if you're a new beginner. The next topic I thought we'd discuss tonight is Varroa mite treatments. We were kind of talking about carnies, help with that and all that different stuff. So I was wondering, like, whenever you do treat or if you don't treat, what do you usually like to do about it? Because there's many different methods for mite control. Like you have green drone comb and doing the brood cycle of the queen. What do you like to do for Varroa mites and kind of handling the percentage of them?
Well, I've transitioned to a mite treatment strategy back in 2020, and I've had to kind of develop this. I'm still working on it, but I started out with an APGuard treatment in early August, and then I did the oxalic acid vapor between Thanksgiving and Christmas. That did pretty good, but I still had high mite counts and a lot of queenlessness in the spring. And last year, for the first time, I did a spring treatment, adding Formic Pro into that regimen, and that responded very well. And my bees was a lot healthier last year. And so I find, for me, I think it's important to rotate whatever treatment you're going to use, and do a wash or a test of some kind. I think the wash is the most reliable from what I've studied about it. So I call it a mite wash. I've never used the alcohol because when I started, you couldn't get alcohol, so I'd use the Dawn Ultra mixture.
Oh
And so
yeah,
I think it's important to test before and after to verify what your treatment did.
yeah. I've heard a lot about that different stuff. Like I like to use a Dawn dishwasher soap, like you just said. I really like to use that method because most everybody has a Dawn dishwasher soap at their home or something, so it's real easy to have. Or if you don't have any, it's really easy to get. Of course, alcohol you can get pretty easy, but sometimes it can be a little more expensive. I've just really liked the Dawn dishwasher soap. And one thing that many beekeepers don't know about me is that I actually started treating last year, which is 2022, and I found some good results this year with that treatment. I did a little experiment. Of course, at the time, I wasn't really trying to do this experiment, but somehow, it followed up into my hands that, while I'm just, being a beekeeper, I did like a little, kind of like a little experiment and that kind of different stuff. So I had a hive that did get treated with, Apivar because, that's the only really big thing I've really, treated with because it's not really, heat, temperature, and all that different stuff. And I think it's probably pretty simple for a beginner at treating, or maybe even beginner in general if you're going to treat whenever you're a beginner. But I had a hive that I did treat and a hive that I didn't treat. And the hive that I didn't treat, they were high in population going into winter. But then right at the end, I'd say around January, February, they slowed down a lot. But in my recent videos, I kind of nursed it back to health. I treated it with some Apivar, and all of a sudden they peaked. They went from 2 frames to 5 frames. Now they're in a 10 frame box. Soon gonna be ready to go to a have a super on them. So I've just and the other hive, they went into winter kind of weaker, a little smaller cluster. They're all different, but through winter I was feeding them. They peaked a lot. So, you could see a little difference in between the both whenever you treat or don't treat. But I really do like to test and see where my mite levels are, to see where are they at and how many mites do I have. Is it before threshold or is it above threshold, all that different kind of stuff. So I'm kind of similar. I like to treat and I like to test. There's this little saying I hear, like test, treat, test. And a lot of times beekeepers will ask, why should I test before and after? Well, main reason is just to see where your mite counts is before and after you treat, see where they are now and if they worked. So that was a good topic, and that's what I kind of like to do and different stuff. Because there's a lot of different treatments and you hear about Formic Pro and there's a lot of different treatments you really could go into. You really could, but I just like to keep it simple. The next topic I think would be liable to discuss real quick before we get into any other future topics is feeding and that kind of different kind of stuff. Like right now I'm feeding 1-to-1 sugar water. So what do you like to feed in spring/fall and winter? What's your kind of strategy for that?
Usually, I'll use sugar bricks if I need it throughout the cold of the winter. Then towards the middle or latter part of February, if I need to, I like to feed with a community feeder by bringing the colonies here home that need feed, and the ones that's plenty heavy, I'll leave them in their yards, and I can feed them up with a community feeder. That seems to be the quickest way to get weight on them for me. And I'll
Yeah,
use I'll use about 1-to-1 at that point. That's about as thick as I ever get it. I don't use 2-to-1. I might get about 1 1/4, 1.3 parts sugar to 1 part water. To me, it's more difficult to make up a huge quantity of 2-to-1. So that's about as thick as I get. And then uh, as we get into spring, I'll thin it up to about 1.3 sugar to 1 part water. I'm sorry, 1.3 water to 1 part sugar. And I'll also use that in the summer after harvest. And that's just
Yeah.
something I learned in the last 2 or 3 years since I've gotten access to YouTube to try to feed that. And I try to slowly feed and get those colonies up to weight, by
Yeah.
mid-October, and get healthy winter bees. That's the goal behind everything I do in August and September.
Yeah. That's the same with me. I like to feed something. If I have like a weak hive during winter that does not have enough food, like I'll say like a single deep or a 5 frame nuke, I'll go ahead and put a sugar brick on them. It's kind of what I kind of do for that. But I generally have been going through this, and I think that if you feed, I've been feeding 1-to-1 sugar water in 1 gallon buckets. I know you can feed in 8-ounce jars, but for me, that bees drink it too fast for me. So I'm using 1 gallon buckets now for that. And I've been doing it's just been doing really good. The bees love that stuff, and I really like 1-to-1 sugar water. Of course, you could play around with 2-to-1, but if 1-to-1, I really like it because it stimulates the queen to start laying eggs, and especially in fall, August, September, October, that gets the queen making a lot more bees and maybe winter bees, and that gets you a better percentage to go for winter. So that's what I really like to do. I like to feed 1-to-1 sugar water in early spring before the honey flow, maybe even after if you want to kind of get them peaking. And then once I put a super on the hive, I don't feed any 1-to-1 sugar water, because what's going to end up, your 1-to-1 sugar water is going to end up in your in your honey. And I don't think you really want that. Many beekeepers
No,
probably wouldn't want that.
I certainly don't.
I wouldn't want that, because they'll do that if they have too much, they'll just go and store that in there. So whenever I have a super on, I don't feed them. But if they don't, or if they do have a super, I won't feed them. But if they do have a super, if they don't have a super, if they don't have a super, then I will feed them if they need it on the certain times. So that's kind of my strategy for feeding, and you can do a lot of different things. But the more north you go, the more you probably want to feed during winter, and all that different stuff. Um,
Yeah, generally I'll quit feeding any sugar syrup in the spring around the 10th of March. That's pretty much my cutoff right there, because I'll start supering up shortly thereafter for the nectar flow.
Yeah, yeah. I have some 1 gallon buckets on some of the hives, but not all of them. Mainly on the splits and smaller hives, like the hives I'm still building up through 10 frame boxes and that different stuff. But if I have a hive that's pretty big and they don't need anything, and I'll stop feeding them around probably this time of the year, April, maybe March even. Now we're already here in April. It's there's a lot of warm weather, and I'm guessing you're experiencing the same. Today it was like 75 degrees, and that's never future topic to talk about.
Well, actually, here today it was windy. The humidity was around 20% at one point this afternoon. The dew point was around 24. I think it got up to about 68 or 70. It was a brisk, kind of windy day here,
Yeah.
and so I'm sure it was probably different than what you had in Southeast Alabama. But
So.
we've had an abundance of cold weather this spring
Oh
here
yeah,
in Northwest Alabama, anyways.
yeah. Because the more north you go, even though we're still in the same state, it's a little different temperature wise, but maybe like 3 or 4 degrees off than from you, maybe 4, 5, 6, maybe 7. Not a huge difference, but just a little difference.
Well,
I'd say.
something really interesting. I know some people in Tuscaloosa. I'm 63 miles north of Tuscaloosa, and they consistently, year after year, they have swarms at least 2 weeks before I do.
Yeah.
And
I already got a tour.
I was just going to say, in going north to Tennessee, which is like 100 miles away, there's not that much difference between here and the Tennessee line.
Yeah. I already caught myself a swarm. I think it was from last year. I'm still trying to figure that out, but right now it's pretty big. I recently went in there and did some stuff and checked on them, and they're doing pretty good. Moved them to a 10 frame box the day before yesterday. And, we're just to give the queen more room because there was like a full frame of brood and full frame on brood, mostly every cell not missed except for the sides. And I knew once those bees hatch, that new box is going to be full. So it was a smart move to go ahead and put them in a 10 frame box before they get so big and, think, should we swarm? I want to prevent that. Definitely don't want to nuke the swarm. Most of the times it won't. But you never know with bees. Bees may decide they want to, even if they're only 5, 7, 10 frames. I guess bees just like to duplicate all the time. That's why I like to try to prevent them. And real quick for another topic, I think we could probably quickly discuss is swarms. I've been talking to a lot of different beekeepers about swarms, swarm catching. Do you ever like to catch swarms to grow your bee yard, or like local swarms, or what's your idea on that?
Well, during my no treatment years, I relied heavily on catching swarms outside of my yard. Plus, I had about 20 to 25 nukes down there. I'd let swarm. At times during those years, I would catch 30 to 45 swarms. A lot of them was my own. Then I had my honey production colonies because I was consistently losing, 25, 30 colonies a year. I had to replace them. I haven't set out swarm traps in a few years, but for probably about 7, 18 years, I trapped a lot around the area, especially in the local town here. I caught quite a few swarms in town. I knew where there was some houses that had bees in them or trees. But last year I only had one swarm, and I haven't had any swarms this year out of my yards. Matter of fact, none of mine probably are really even close. The last time I looked in them about a week ago. So, but I'll bring in a swarm when I can. I just don't I don't trap and stuff like I used to.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, catching swarms and cutouts, all that different stuff takes a little time to be able to do. But it is, a good way to expand your bee yard if you're a little smaller. And I know like bigger beekeepers like, Randy McCaffrey and those guys, catch a lot of swarms and a lot each year. I'm gonna be catching some swarms this year. Probably not as much as them. Maybe, if there's enough swarms that comes up, but probably just local swarms that people say I have a swarm in my front yard, can you come get it? That kind of a swarm catching kind of thing. That's what I really like to catch. And I've been seeing a lot of people posting on Instagram and YouTube, and in my local area there's a lot of swarms right now and a lot of bees right now, so that's a good thing. And in my local area, I'd say within like a 20, 30, 40, maybe 40-mile range, there's not many beekeepers in my local area. And there could be a beekeeper like 5 miles away from me, but I have no idea that's there. But for the most part, I don't have that many beekeepers in my area, except for like Dauphin, Alabama. But it's kind of like an hour away from our house and that different kind of stuff. But for the most part, we're not too close to any other beekeepers. So that's good and bad for some stuff. Bad for if there's some beekeepers in my local area, like 5 miles away from me, that'd be great for drone mating for me and them. Good thing is I can catch a lot of the swarms that are local around here, so it has some pros and cons for that. But for the most part, we don't have that many local beekeepers in our local area. At least in a 5, maybe 10-mile range, maybe 1 or 2. But for the most part, not many beekeepers up there around us. So, but looks like we got a lot of people in here, and yes, I feed all winter. Wisconsin never seems to stop. Yep, Wisconsin's pretty up north. You have a lot of cold weather up there. For us down south, I'm sure we're not really big fans of the real cold, like near like I'd say December, right before Christmas. We had like a lot of a little cold weather. I'm sure you guys experienced it a little more colder. We had like 20-degree weather, I believe, along with wind chills, which makes it about 15 degrees. That it was just, beyond what we were used to, going into winter. And usually it's like highs in the winter are like 50, lows are 30, 35 degrees, and it ain't that cold. You can even get warmer days coming, and all that different stuff down here in Alabama, in southeastern Alabama, and that different stuff. But I'm glad we don't have those that cold weather, like up in like people up north, like Ian Stepler in Canada and some other guys in the United States that are more northern than us. I'm glad I don't have their weather. It's definitely pretty cold from what I hear, like negative -20 or something during winter. I'm guessing something around there, just depending on what part of Canada they're in. But most wise, that's our range for temperatures. Maybe in the winter we'll have 50, 60 degrees and low 30 and 40s. Sometimes, lows can be 50 degrees. It just all depends. That leads me on a little topic. During winter, what kind of temperatures, what is your temperature range during winter?
Well, back before Christmas this year, it got down to 7 degrees during that cold snap. But all through my life, I've seen it as high as 80 degrees on Christmas and highs in the 20s. But on average, I'll say we get a lot of mid 30s, upper 20s, and a lot of cloudy, overcast, upper 40s, and through around 60 degrees. And we get a lot of brisk southwesterly winds as storms approach, and then the winds will shift, and we get some brisk north winds for about a day and a half after it passes. So it can do anything from go to late May to to the dead of winter in just a 3-day period up here.
Yeah, definitely. Because I always tell people that us down south have a lot of fluctuating temperatures. Like it can be warm the first day, it could be cold the next day. It's unbelievable how big of a roller coaster winter we have down here. And probably for most of us in the southern area, we have a lot of fluctuating temperatures, and it happens, where some days you may have 50-degree weather to 70-degree weather, and it automatically shifts back down to 40-degree weather. It's happened before. It happened this year a lot of times where it's warm. We had a real weird kind of stimulation where during the weeks it'd be 70s and 60s and all that different stuff, but then in the weekends it gets down to like 50 degrees in the low 30 degrees and maybe high 60s next day of the weekend, and then it gets back warm. Does the same the next weekend, but now we've kind of broken out of that little stimulation of cold on the weekend and warm on the weeks. It's been okay. We've had a little downside sometimes, but for the most part, we've been pretty stable. Most of the time during winter, we're a lot of times not stable. We can go from a lot of different temperatures in a quick amount of time. Definitely something how that all happens. That's one question real quick, just a small one. Do y'all have fluctuating temperatures like us, or is it a little different in North Alabama?
Yeah, it fluctuates pretty dramatically, and it seemed like I've noticed in recent years, even right here in this little pocket of where I'm at, it seems like the hardwoods will green up even a little slower than areas just an hour east of me, even though we're the same distance in North Alabama. And it seemed like the bees, like in Coleman, in that area over there, would be right at or a little ahead of me in their spring buildup. I've noticed that in the past couple of years too, but for some reason it seemed like the cold just kind of lags in this area a little bit longer than it does, like in Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, and certainly, down in your area.
Yeah. Next topic I think we'll discuss is honey production and all that different stuff. So whenever I'd say around spring, maybe April, maybe even March, May, maybe sometimes June. I got a question from a guy a while back. I think it was like maybe a few weeks ago. do you look for a certain flavor in your honey? If so, I kind of like say like what you think it may be that your bees are getting, or do you look for a certain flavor? I got that question asked, and I thought I'd ask you.
Well, for me, I had some yards. I used to have about 63 colonies altogether, which honey production wise, I had between 30 and 40 usually. I'll have some yards that have light honey that's sweet, with it's almost bland, and I'll have some that's darker and richer. And for me, I just blend it all together and mix it up good, and it just seems like it balances out and has a really good flavor. Uh, I those lighter honeys usually come from areas that has a decent amount of area, like within the last 5 years where the timber's been cut and you have the undergrowth of weeds and stuff coming back. Seem like that's where you get those lighter honeys. And then I try to have my bees also in areas that have a lot of hardwood timber, so that probably a lot of tulip poplar and some of the other uh, blooming species, probably dominate more in those yards. So there's definitely a color difference in some of my yards in the honey and the taste, even though all my honeys are within all my yards were within 10 miles of my home. I'm kind of located in the middle of my out yards.
Down here, we have a lot of different kind of pine pollen. We have a lot of like southern longleaf pines, what we call it, and what it is called, and it makes a lot of pollen. I'm surprised with this year. It's unbelievable how much pollen's on those trees. I'm guessing my honey is basically pine along with some wildflowers. Like you said, I'll just usually just mix it up and say, I had a guest on a week ago, and what he said makes sense. Is call it wildflower honey, where it's just it's different flowers, it's different pollen, it's from wherever. So I thought that was pretty cool to hear something like that. And I don't really look for a certain flavor in my honey. I just say maybe this is pollen from my pine trees. But either way or never, it's still good honey, and it's South. Usually, I'll just call it South Alabama honey. That's usually what I'll call it.
Yeah, I label mine as wildflower honey, and I don't try to I don't try to say this is clover honey or whatever, whatever happens to be blooming, because I prefer to just blend it all together, and it's a mixture of everything that blooms from the middle of March through the latter part of June. So I just label it as uh, wildflower honey.
Yeah, that's a name that I think is pretty popular for honey production, and all that different kind of stuff to sell your honey and do all that different kind of stuff. But I got a few more topics tonight, and I'm leaving a few of these for the last topics. This is one that I wanted to ask that of course all of us do. So what do you like to do for expansion? Do you have a certain method for splitting and preventing swarms and making more hives, or what's your brief on that, and what you like to do for expanding?
All right, so for splitting, which I did in the past, I've experimented with doing splits in March, April, May, all the way through the 1st of August. I got away from early splits pretty quickly because early in my career, it was tough or very difficult to get good queens in the middle or latter part of March. So I shot away from those pretty quickly. And I discovered that if I was patient and wait on into May and June, I get much better queens. And but currently, what I'm doing is I'll pick my best hives for honey production. I'll set aside about 10 or 12 this week, and I'll nurse them along, let them build up, and I'll split them in June. Try to get them done in the middle of June at the latest. Sometimes it may be in July, but I have found, or at least in my experience, those splits that I'll make or the nukes I'll make in mid or latter part of June seem like they produce the most honey the following year. And I also see this with colonies that happen to supersede their queens during that month, that they'll produce a lot of honey the next year. I'll always mark those colonies that I've caught superseding in June or July, especially if they're starting to build up pretty strong. towards the fall flow. Those will make a lot of honey the following year. And then I did a lot of swarm trapping and stuff to expand as well, but I never did. At one time, I kind of wanted to get up to about 70 colonies, and even though I did get there, I couldn't stay there very long because I didn't treat for mites at the time, and I just had it drilled in my head and just kind of hard headed that I thought that over a period of time the bees would breed this out of themselves, but they never did. But I find it a lot easier to keep bees alive since I started monitoring and treating for mites. I still have my biggest issues now is queen loss. I've had quite a few go queenless this spring, but that's basically it. Making the splits like that, and I'm not afraid to take splits off my production colonies even in June because the honey flow is pretty much over here, and I've done that in the past. Or if I'm short of brood, I'll take some out of them because the honey flow is pretty much over, and those techniques has worked good for me. It's probably not the most efficient compared to people that split early in the year, but it's just the way I learned to do it from the contact I had. Now, if I could go back and have this access to YouTube like we have now, I would probably do it much more similar to what you'd see a lot of people do it now, like Bob Beanie and some of those folks. That's clearly a better, more efficient way to do it, but I just didn't learn to do it that way.
Yeah. Expanding your bee yard for splitting and preventing swarming and all that different stuff. I'd like to do it different ways. There are so many different methods for doing that. You can take free frames of brood with some larvae and eggs and put them in a nuke along with some drawn foundation and leave them for a month, maybe a month and 2 weeks, maybe 6 weeks in total. Leave them there, let them do their thing, and come back. We have a good main queen, and they're ready to be, very there. That's kind of the method I really like. Or you can take a queen out from your original hive along with 5 frames of, of brood and different kind of stuff, and kind of stimulate swarming. That kind of does that thing, as we all know. That kind of also prevents swarming. There's so many different ways to do that. And, it's unbelievable how many methods there are to do that. We got a quick question here from Texas Friendly Beekeeper Stan, and he asked, "Hey, Randall, do you get sourwood honey?"
Well, honestly, I can't say for sure I do. There are sourwood trees in this area, and they do bloom, but I don't know if we get a significant amount of sourwood from it. But they do bloom year after year. From people I've talked to in the area, they say probably once every 10 or 12 years you might get some honey off of it. It usually blooms at the time of trying to think of the name of those other bushes. It'll come to me in a minute, but it blooms along with about 3 or 4 more trees, usually in the middle of June. And if it does come in, it's probably a mimosa is what I was trying to think of. Mimosa and sumac, those all bloom at the same time as sourwood here. But yeah, I see lots of it around here. I just don't know how much of an impact it has in terms of them storing it, or they may just have enough to rear brood and not have an excess to store.
Also, not really that sure if we have, sourwood honey either. We probably have some trees maybe around, but, we don't really see it that, often. But, we can definitely sometimes, there are trees, like you said, but not all the time. And, but sourwood honey, I hear that it's a really good, very good honey. And I'm sure it is. But but I don't know. I can't say for certain that we have any, but maybe we do. We probably could. We very well could, and we very will have, little sourwood coming, little nectar coming in. But for the most part, I'm not all that sure. Same as you, but I know they have a lot in like the Appalachian Mountains and other places for sourwood honey, like Bob Benny. He talks a lot about sourwood honey, and he makes a lot of sourwood honey. Just all depends on where you're at to do that. In my opinion, I think.
Yeah, and I've been over there to his place and bought some of that sourwood honey. So I've never really tasted any here that tastes like that. So if we do get some, I don't think it's very much. Certainly not enough to market it as sourwood.
Yeah, because I haven't tried Balbanius yet, but I'm sure it is very good, for sourwood and, all that different kind of stuff. There are so many different, honeys and, you can have and market them, but I usually don't market them as a certain honey because you can't tell. You can't tell where they're going to get their nectar. They could be going like a long way and getting some other flower opposite from what you're saying that they're getting. So it's all depends on, what and it's really hard to be able to know exactly what, honey and all that different stuff to know what exactly it is, which is a little more challenging, I think, but so I know there's a lot of people who market that, and I think it just needs to be like a good source, and I do know there's a lot of people who take it to like centers, places where they'll test the honey and see what it actually is. I've never done that before. Have you ever got somebody to sample your honey and tell you what it is?
No, I have not. That's something maybe I should do at some point, but I've never done that.
Yeah.
I know one year, probably about 6 or 7, 8 years ago, I had some pretty dark honey that year. I think it was probably mostly tulip poplar, maybe a bunch of mimosa, but it was pretty dark. It was really good, but it was I guess you could kind of call it. It had a rich flavor to it, a little bit stronger flavor, but it was still pretty good. But that's by far the darkest honey I've had that one year.
Definitely heard about that, about all that different kind of stuff, and you can test your honey, but I haven't. Of course, I'm sure it does cost you a little money to do that and see exactly what it is and exactly what you can call it. But you can just call it wildflower honey because that's generally what a lot of beekeepers call it, just because it is, and it's really simple to call it that. I generally like to call it South Alabama honey, something simple. Just it's from South Alabama, and our honey that we make, I don't have any around here to show, but it's like real light. It's like a light honey, and it is really good. It's not too sweet. It's not less sweet. For me, I really like it, and I have a lot of people who I sell it to, and who sometimes family I'll give it to, and they love the honey, and so I think that's good. I'll sometimes sell honey. That may be another quick little topic. Do you like to sell your honey to make a little income out of your bees, or do you sell honey, that kind of thing?
Yes, I do. I've been selling honey ever since my first year.
Yeah.
I guess, well, since I started, I actually got a place in my honey house right up there, but in 17 years, I've harvested like 3,300 something gallon of honey. And
Yeah.
let's say last year was my best year. I got 385 gallon. But yeah, I do try to sell it at some of the towns in this area that I have some places that resell it, and people come to my home and buy it from me as well. But yeah, honey production has been my number one thing that I've made money with beekeeping in since I started. I did sell a few swarms a couple of years, but it got to the point where I was having to keep everything I could catch to replace my losses every year.
Like since the start of our beekeeping journey, we sold some honey, and we sold a lot of it. The first time we sold honey, we sold about every single bottle we sold, and it was beyond, we're like, wow, how did this sell so quick? It sold fast. And it does. If it's cheap and it's local and it's raw honey, people are going to buy that stuff. And of course, local honey and raw honey ain't all that cheap. But a lot of times, beekeepers will just, people, people who don't even have bees, people just citizens will just love that honey because it's raw. It's not that stuff it has at the grocery store. I found that, local raw honey is the best honey, better than, all the other stuff at the grocery store. And while we're talking about, making money out of honey, do you like to, do anything like to make money? Like, do you ever make queens or sell bees and that kind of things, or have you just go stick to the honey?
Well, I did sell some swarms a few years ago. I'm wanting to get into making some nukes and selling a few. Uh, I say this embarrassingly. I've never raised any queens. I want to learn to raise queens this year. I should have been in that process, but this weird weather we've had this spring has set my bees back a lot, and I don't have that many drones flying yet. But I want to, here in about 2 or 3 days, I want to graft some and put them on there and just see what happens. I just hope there's enough. I'm just going to try to graft enough to make about 10 colonies and not overload, not make too many for the drones I have flying. There's just not that many drones flying right now in my colonies.
Yeah. I haven't raised queens yet either. I want to this year. And, I've been expanding more than even thinking about raising queens. And the reason for it is I want to have a lot of bees to make good queens. So it may be next year before I even get into queen rearing. Because this year I'm trying to focus more on expanding the bee yard, making a little money this year along with honey. This year I think I'm going to be focusing way more on honey sales and making honey for myself and really looking for queen rearing. But I may raise some queens this year. Maybe get me 10 queens. But the good thing is that I already have all my equipment to raise those queens. So therefore, if I don't raise queens this year, there's always next year to raise queens. So I think that's the best thing I really like about beekeeping is you can always save that equipment and use it for next year. And if you don't do it this year and that kind of different stuff. So we're gonna see. I'm gonna do the same thing. Throw me about 10, 15 queens. If they do good, great. If they don't, I'll have to try again and see if I can do it correctly next time. So we're just gonna see, how that all plays out and how it works. There's a lot of beekeepers I've watched a lot of beekeepers about queen rearing, like Bob Binney and Cayman Reynolds on the queen rearing stuff, and I've been really liking both of them. I like the way with cloak boards and double screen boards that Bob Binney does, and I like that starter / finisher that Cayman does, and they're both great. I think they both look really. I think Cayman's method, I think everybody knows, is real simple. Seems like it's just a basic method. You basically all you really have to do is put 5 frames of bees, shake them in there, make sure they don't have larvae, and put a cell and put grafts in there. Make sure you have a lot of bees, and that's about it. So I think that's great for a beginner. But at the same time, I don't know anything about queen rearing, so I can't say for sure about that. But from what I know and hear about the starter / finisher, that it's good.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly don't have any experience. I've been studying it, but I think, and I actually did a queen rearing. I went to a queen rearing class a couple of years ago, and we grafted like 5, and 3 of them took. Now this was like in mid to late June. We had trouble finding pollen, but in my opinion, I feel like the key to the whole thing is getting that cell builder right. That's what I'm going to focus on when I try, making sure I have an abundance of nutrition and nurse bees. I think that's really important. And also I feel like they need good access to pollen, nectar, fresh nectar, or sugar water, and water itself. I think those are the important ingredients. But that's the way I'm going to approach it. So I'll find out, once I do it, if that's the way to go.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things about that, and it's I think it's gonna be fun just to try it out and see how it goes. I've been watching videos. I haven't took a queen rearing class online or in a local bee club, but I think it's still gonna be good. I got a few more things. So this is a question / a topic that I want to talk about, and So the picture of the thumbnail that I have is, of your hive. It goes up to about, I don't know how high. It looked like 10 supers. Is that correct?
I had 8 mediums above the excluder, so there was a total of a deep and 1 medium below the excluder, then 8 above in those hives.
Wow. How did
So
you
that
build those up?
I was just going to say that colony I'm standing next to produced, based on the average weight, it was about 240 pounds last year of honey.
That's a lot.
So that
Definitely.
1 yard right there, I call it my magic yard, is 7 colonies there. It produced like 105 gallon of honey off of 7 colonies last year.
Yeah, definitely. Because I saw that and I was like, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of boxes, and that must
And that
be a lot.
and one thing I do want to mention, because a lot of people was hitting me up about that. That was a product of me having an abundance of drone comb for the amount of hives I had. And I'm going to get away from keeping bees, stacking the boxes that high. But that I was just simply utilizing all those boxes as best I could. And last year was it's by far the best nectar flow I've ever seen last year in my career. So I was trying to take it full advantage of that. But but I'm going to try to get to a point to where I'm just stacking them 5 or 6 high, and then I now have a dehydrating room, and I'm going to take those off and sling them, and just keep bottom super. And I'm going to try that. It's probably not going to be this year. This is going to be, I'm going to have the best honey year last year, and then this year is going to be the worst because that late freeze we had mid March, it's killed a lot of stuff. So the honey, I'm not going to make hardly any honey at all this year. Don't look like. I had 4 and 5 supers on colonies last year, mostly full of honey. Now I don't even have one full of super of honey on any of my colonies. So it's a huge difference.
Yeah, because I saw that and I thought that was pretty cool. I've ever the highest I've had on the hive was probably 1 or 2 supers. Now there's one time where I had a deep full of honey, and I mean edge to edge, it was just full of honey. I was able to extract 8 frames from that. I'd say about 100 pounds. I'd say,
Yeah.
and I put that. I extracted all that. It made 5 gallons worth of honey. I put it back into hive, and at least 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, they fill up all the way capped, and I could have easily extracted that, and they'd still get through winter because whenever I put it back on, the bees barely ate anything. They ate a little bit, I'd say 1 or 2 frames worth of honey, but really not that much. I could have easily extracted that, but it was it was fine just to leave it on there for the bees for this winter, just because just in case, you never know.
And the other thing that I do that allowed me to get that is, and it took me a few years to kind of figure it out, make it work for me, but I implement Walt Wright's nectar management style of swarm control, and I'm pretty successful with that. I would say about 90% effective. So what I try to do is in those honey production colonies, I don't take splits out of them unless I've messed up and had to pull a split off of them. But I try to get as many bees as I can in there, or let them raise as many bees as possible, where whenever that nectar flow gets here, they can take full advantage of it. So that's probably a strategy that's kind of unique, and that I had to learn, because Walt was my first big influence when I got a hold of his information. And at that time in my career, being that I couldn't, almost all the March queens I would buy at that time would supersede. So I quit buying them, and I just made my mind up I was going to learn to do this. And it took me 3 years to get it squared away. But that's how I learned to get that much honey off of colonies, utilizing that nectar management technique.
Yeah, definitely. I really thought that was pretty cool. It has a lot of boxes on it, and whenever you went, did you extract all that honey, or did you leave some of it on the hive for winter?
I'll extract it down to the queen excluder, so I'll winter with 1 deep and 1 medium.
Yep.
Usually that magic yard up there, I don't ever have to feed. They'll wind up about 90 pounds, but the rest of the yards I have to feed to get them up to weight.
Yeah. That's what I like to do. I really think that a deep and a super, or a deep and a super, is really a really good strategy for that. And that's what I really like to go into winter with, is a deep and a super. I think that's a really good configuration to go through. And that gets me to a topic that I think is a topic that I don't hear all the time, but it's still a topic that can be discussed. Is what kind of hive configuration do you like to go through winter? Like double deep, or a single and a super? I hear a lot about that, and there's so many different pros and cons. I was wondering if you could discuss with us a little bit about what you like to do.
Well, my favorite right now is a deep and a medium. Now, for years following Walt Wright's configuration, I had a medium on the bottom board, and then a deep and two deep mediums on top of that. But I've gotten away from that because I need the tighter volume for the better mite control. I also like to overwinter nukes. I've been doing that well over 10 years, and I've also overwintered bees in just a medium before. They'll all work, but my absolute favorite is to have a good healthy cluster of bees in a single deep and a medium at this time. I eventually want to experiment with overwintering in deeps only, and with no mediums at all on there. But right now the deep and the medium, that's that's been the best overall configuration for me at this point.
Yeah, I like the deep and the super, but I have been overwintering with double deeps and singles. I've tried with every single one except for a foul frame nuke, and that's what I really like to do. I think that a deep and a super is one of the best, I think. And I've been hearing a lot about a different configuration, like supers, like, instead of using a deep and a super, I know a lot of beekeepers will overwinter with 3 supers. What do you think about that strategy?
3 mediums on top of a deep. Is that
Just
what you're saying?
free,
Or
like,
just all
just
mediums?
all mediums.
Okay, yeah, I think that works perfectly fine in my opinion. I would not be afraid to do it at all.
Because a lot of times I think that comes into play where it's always you're able to transpose them, like you're able to put supers and supers, and it's to the point where it doesn't matter what they are, it's the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, as your supers, your brood box. I know a lot of beekeepers do that, and I think it works great. And I really don't think it's much different from a deep. It's just separate boxes, and it's smaller, and it's just a little different. But for me, I've been really liking the singles. I think my main 2 favorites is probably a single and a super going into winter. It's just,
In my first couple of years, I've actually overwintered in double deep, so I've run those 2, even though I didn't mention it in the past. And I actually overwintered a colony as a double deep this winter. But yeah, those they works good too for sure.
we also got a quick question here from DC's Bees. Randall, do you have any experience with slatted Uraks?
No, sir, I sure don't.
Yeah. I hear a lot about them for different kind of management of, I'd say, for moisture and different kind of stuff, and I think they work good. I've never had any experience with them. I've heard all about them and how they work, but I've never really used them. So but I think they still work good. They definitely will work, but I've never used any, at least down here in Alabama.
Yeah, I've looked at them and considered it, but it's if you got 50 or 60 colonies, it's kind of you kind of run into another piece of equipment to deal with, and is it worth the extra hassle to have that? I would have to see that in action, maybe on a small scale, to see if it was justified.
Yeah, definitely, because sometimes they can definitely do that, and because especially because it's another piece of an equipment that you have to have, you know, especially if you're a big guy and maybe you're like Bob Benny, maybe you have 100 hives. It gets to a point where it's pretty hard to do that, and you can't do that all the time. So I think it's a great idea I think it's something good to have if you're a smaller beekeeper. But if you don't need one, I've just never used one. But for a big scale, I wouldn't really have much of a clue of how that would be like. To have an extra piece of equipment. All that different kind of stuff. Definitely another piece of equipment you can definitely consider. I think you definitely could consider it, and if you wanted to get it, you could go for it if you want to try it out. But
That's something I'm going to implement this year. I've never used is double screen boards. I
yeah,
realize in watching Bob Benny and some of the others like the guy over in France, Richard, can't remember his last name, but I realize I'm pretty sure I've been missing out on a great tool. So I want to use some double screen boards this year and to just see what I can learn with those as well.
I've heard a lot about double screen boards, you know, but I've never used one yet. I want to get one because I want to try it out and see how it works, because I have no idea about how they work. And I've seen people use them. You can definitely use them for like splitting and doing all that different stuff. So I think it's definitely a good piece of equipment, to have on hand, because you definitely could use it for different stuff. But looks like we're here at an hour. I'll go ahead and end us off here. I appreciate Randall for coming on here for a little bit and talking bees with us. I definitely had a good time.
Yeah, I do. I did too. I certainly enjoyed it. Enjoyed interacting. Glad to meet you and everything. Enjoyed this time.
Yeah, definitely, because we learned a lot of different stuff, and I bet a lot of different beekeepers, learned a lot of different things, about bees in general, and that's one thing as beekeepers we love to chat about bees, because there's a lot of things that you can definitely chat about bees, and I think it's definitely something good to do and learn different things and have all that experience, and it's just beekeepers chatting with other beekeepers, and I think it's definitely good. And if anybody wants to check out Randall's channel, I'll leave it into this in the live chat here for y'all to check his YouTube page out. I've been watching it a little bit. I've been kind of busy, so I haven't been able to watch it all yet. Because right now, we're definitely in that stage of where we're getting kind of busy. If you know bees and swarms and all different stuff. But I'll leave it down there, Randall's YouTube channel. Y'all go check it out. Subscribe while you're there if you're new. But we'll go ahead and end it off here. Thanks, Randall, for coming on, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. Have a good evening. Thanks everyone for joining.
Definitely. Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll catch you on the next one.
Okay.